Hello, the story I want to tell you today takes place in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. Saitama Prefecture is a province in the southeast of Japan, located in the metropolitan area of Tokyo. In the southeast of Saitama Prefecture, there is a city called Misato, about 20 kilometers from Tokyo, and has an area of 30,000 square kilometers. And the story today takes place here. The main character of the story is Junko Furuta, born on January 18, 1971. The story takes place when she was only 17 years old and was a student of Yashio Minami Middle School, Saitama Prefecture. She has a cheerful personality and a sweet appearance, which attracts other students in the school. Her father is a business director in a pottery factory, and her mother is a housewife. In addition to her parents, she also has a brother and an older brother. The family's conditions are not quite cheap. The economy is supported by her father alone. To alleviate the burden for her father, Junko decided to go to work after graduating from high school. In addition to going to school, she also works as a salesperson in a clothing store or packaging in a pottery factory to help her family. When she was about to graduate from high school, she applied for an interview at a company and successfully passed the audition. After graduating, she could start working at the company. This was like a new journey in her life. However, no one could have imagined that one day, on the way to work, she would encounter something terrifying. What happened afterward made everyone feel a deep sense of dread. So, what exactly happened that day? Let's take a look back at November 25, 1988. November 25, 1988 was a beautiful Friday. As usual, after school, Junko went to her job at a pottery factory. At 8:20 p.m., Junko finished her work and started to head home. She packed up and got on her way. The road was dimly lit with only a few streetlights, and there was hardly anyone walking. Suddenly, a strange man on a motorcycle came up from behind and hit her hard, causing her to fall to the ground. Before she could react, the man on the motorcycle quickly fled the scene. As she tried to stand up, a young man came to help and told her that the man was part of the underworld and had been watching her. He warned her that the man might come back to harm her. It was very dangerous, and he offered to escort her home for peace of mind. Junko, still shaken from the fall, didn't fully understand what had happened. But she felt that the man in front of her seemed trustworthy, so she got on his bike and followed him. After a while, she noticed they were in a deserted area with no one around. He stopped and revealed that he was also a member of the local gang, and that the man on the motorcycle was his accomplice. His name was Hiroshi Mizuno, 18 years old, currently on leave from school. He then threatened her, saying that if she agreed to spend the night with him, he would let her go. If not, she would die. Terrified, Junko finally agreed to his demand. Hiroshi took her to a nearby hotel and started to talk to her. However, he did not keep his promise to let her go home. Instead, a more evil idea was born. He arranged for 3 other criminals to gather at a park. Those 3 people were Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe. One of them was also the person who had driven the motorcycle and hit Junko. The 3 teenagers were waiting in front of the park. Not long after, Hiroshi took Junko to meet them. The 4 of them looked through her bag and found a diary with her address in it. They threatened to go to her house and harm her family if she dared to escape. Junko was terrified and believed they might actually do it, so she had no choice but to obey them. After a long discussion, the 4 of them decided to take her to Shinji's house. His house was in Aizashi Ward, Tokyo. It was a 2-story house with an electric pole outside. He often sneaked into his room on the 2nd floor through the electric pole. Shinji's family consisted of 4 people. Besides his parents, he also had a brother. His parents lived on the 1st floor, while he and his brother lived on the 2nd floor. Early that day, the 4 of them took Junko to the bedroom on the 2nd floor and locked her up. At that time, Shinji's father had just gone on a trip. In the house, there were only his mother and brother. Initially, they were worried that Junko might try to escape, so they took good care of her. And Junko believed that the 4 of them would eventually let her go after some time. So, she didn't try to escape. That day, Hiroshi was concerned that Junko's parents might report her missing to the police. So he made her call home and say that she had been feeling down recently and had decided to stay at a friend's house for a while. She needed some private space and hoped her family wouldn't worry too much. Over the phone, Junko's parents didn't notice anything unusual. They thought their daughter was at her friend's house, so they didn't report it to the police. 2 days later, on November 28th, the four of them felt bored and wanted to find something more exciting. So they called 2 more friends to join in. The noise in the room became too loud, attracting Shinji's father's attention. The father had just returned from a trip. When asked, Shinji claimed that Junko was his new girlfriend and asked his father not to bother them. After that, all 6 men rushed into the room to torment her. Junko, too scared to resist, stood still, which made them feel very satisfied. A few days later, Junko was repeatedly taken out for their amusement. One day, when Shinji's mother went upstairs to clean the room, she accidentally saw Junko there. She knew her son had brought her home before, but didn't expect her to still be there. She asked Junko to go home quickly. However, a few days later, she still saw Junko on the 2nd floor and told her to leave. After that, she refused to take care of her son. It was December, and the weather outside was very cold. The 4 boys often gathered at Shinji's house to play. They even forced Junko to take off her clothes and dance to the music. They made her stand naked on the 2nd floor balcony, leaving her shivering in the cold. In the following months, Junko continued to meet their unbearable demands to prevent her parents from calling the police. Hiroshi sometimes asked Junko to call home so her parents wouldn't worry. They found her obedient, so they began to call her more often. When they were tired, one of the 4 would stay behind to watch Junko while the others went out to get food, only to continue tormenting her when they returned. Hiroshi even used a camera to record those moments and made Junko watch. One day, Hiroshi lied to Junko, telling her that her father had passed away in a car accident. Junko's sadness amused him, and he then revealed it was just a joke. The whole group continued to use similar words to hurt her feelings. At one point, a member of the group intended to find a way to let her go but was discovered and warned by the others. After that, the group continued to torment her. At that point, Junko couldn't stand it anymore and cried out for help. Junko's parents, who were in the basement, heard the sound but didn't intervene because they were afraid of the men. On December 7th, 1988, the 13th day of her captivity, 6 men went to sleep late at night. During this time, Junko had suffered immense pain both mentally and physically, but she still mustered the strength to put on some clothes, run down to the 1st floor, and look for a phone to call the police. However, before she could explain the situation to the police, Hiroshi appeared right behind her. He was furious at her attempt to escape. He immediately hung up the phone and dragged her back to the 2nd floor. Afterward, he called the police chief and claimed that it was just a joke among friends. Then he ran upstairs, poured gasoline on her legs, and set them on fire as punishment. The result was that her legs were severely burned and she could no longer walk. Other people followed Hiroshi's lead and set fire to other parts of Junko's body. The wounds on her body began to bleed, and a foul smell developed due to the lack of medical attention. Shinji's parents realized that the situation at home was getting worse, but they were too afraid of the young men's anger to intervene. Shinji's brother, who also lived on the 2nd floor, knew about Junko's ordeal but was too scared to report it to the police. Junko was unable to walk because of the severe bruising all over her body. In the end, she was forced to lie on the floor, and she could only relieve herself there. Some members of the group often used that room as a hiding place, and what Junko had done made them feel extremely uncomfortable. They even began to withhold food from her. Gradually, the amount of food they provided became less and less. Sometimes she only received a box of milk or a few pieces of bread in an entire day, and other times she was left starving. Hiroshi even beat Junko for walking around the house and bothering him. They continued to attack her face, making it swollen and deformed. They were envious of her. At that time, Junko was in a state of exhaustion. To them, Junko was just a toy to satisfy their desires. Hiroshi came to Shinji's house with an angry face. He had lost more than 100,000 yen playing a game the night before and was feeling frustrated. When Shinji saw Junko's face, he was very angry. Seeing her lying on the floor, he took out his anger on her. By then, Junko's consciousness was blurred, and she could hardly make a sound. Her legs were paralyzed, leaving her unable to move and at the mercy of others. Even after attacking her, Hiroshi still did not feel satisfied. Hiroshi found a heavy, round object on top of a 1.7 kilograms iron bar. They continued to use that iron bar to attack Junko's belly for 2 hours. The next morning, on January 5th, they discovered that Junko had passed away. They were somewhat prepared for this situation. Hiroshi found a truck from his previous workplace and picked up some gold, cement, and bricks from a nearby building material store. He also prepared a 60 centimeters diameter and 90 centimeters high iron box from the factory. First, they wrapped Junko in a blanket and put her in a suitcase. Then they drove the suitcase to an empty plot of land and placed her in the iron box. Hiroshi, who was a believer and spiritual person, was involved in this process. Hiroshi was afraid that Junko would turn into a ghost and come back to avenge him. So he put a videotape in the box along with her. The tape contained a Japanese TV series called Chuan Chuan, which was Junko's favorite show. During her time in captivity, Junko often mentioned the series. Afterward, the group mixed cement and poured it into the box, sealing it shut with glue. They drove to Tokyo with the intention of throwing the box into the sea. However, due to a road closure, they feared the traffic police might stop them for a check. Instead, they changed direction and moved to Wakashu Beach Park near Tokyo Bay. There, they discarded the box in a grassy field on the side of the road. To cover their tracks, they thoroughly cleaned the car afterward. Finally, they returned to Shinji's house and destroyed everything related to Junko. On January 23, 1989, 18 days after Junko passed away, Hiroshi and Ogura were arrested by the police for having sex with a girl. At first, they thought the police had found Junko's body, so they revealed some details about her. Later, they learned that they were arrested for another case. Both of them eventually confessed their crimes during the investigation. They were detained at a juvenile detention center in Nerima District, Tokyo. Based on their confessions, the police became suspicious and thought they might be involved in another case, so they conducted a search of their residence. On March 29, 1989, 2 months after Junko passed away, 2 investigators searched Hiroshi's house and found some women's underwear, leading them to believe he was involved in other cases as well. The next day, the police conducted an investigation on Hiroshi and Ogura. During the investigation, Hiroshi believed that Ogura had confessed about Junko's death, so he directly admitted to the crime and recounted the entire story. On March 30, 1989, the case was officially opened for investigation. Following the location provided by Hiroshi, the police discovered a body. Junko was found in a state of disintegration, making her unrecognizable. The police confirmed her identity by comparing fingerprints. Through forensic examination, it was revealed that her face was deformed, most of her teeth were broken, her chest contained metal fragments, her ribs were fractured, her hair was torn out, leaving only patches. Her body was disfigured, with some pieces of glass found inside her. She was also found to be pregnant. Through the location of the call that Junko made to her parents, the police tracked down Shinji's house and successfully arrested the group, including Shinji's brother. As a result, a group of 7 people was investigated, with Hiroshi identified as the main culprit among the 4 original members. They were all between the ages of 16 and 18, making this an extremely serious case of youth crime. The police then conducted a deeper investigation into each person's history. They found that Hiroshi, aged 18, had a father who was a finance director and a mother who was a piano teacher. Despite their relatively affluent family situation, Hiroshi's parents were often busy with work, so he was raised by his grandmother. Hiroshi only came home to live with his parents after graduating from elementary school. Because Hiroshi was not cared for properly as a child, his relationship with his parents was strained. In an attempt to make up for this, his parents made mistakes and tried their best to meet his physical and financial needs. In middle school, he joined the school's judo club and learned some combat skills, which he often used to bully his classmates. In March 1988, Hiroshi dropped out of high school and joined a group of bad influences in society. His family tried to persuade him to stay away from those people and arranged for him to work at a construction materials company, but he ignored their efforts. Over time, the conflicts escalated, and he even hit his mother during a fight. When his father found out, he immediately kicked Hiroshi out of the house. Afterward, Hiroshi gathered a group of young men who had broken the law, dropped out of school, and established an organization called the Extreme Youth Association. Hiroshi became the leader of the group and lived off the money and the influence that came with it. Gifanjo Ogura, 17 years old, is Hiroshi's younger brother. His father is a deliveryman and his mother works in a hotel. His parents divorced when he was in the 3rd grade, and afterward he went to live with his mother. In high school, he met Hiroshi, quickly dropped out of school, and joined the organization founded by his brother. Gifanjo Shinji Minato, 16 years old, had a father who was the director of a hospital and a mother who was a nurse. At home, his parents often fought, and after each fight, his father would take out his anger on Shinji and his brother. Growing up in such an environment made Shinji's personality increasingly arrogant, and he often attacked his classmates. One day, Shinji's brother had his motorbike stolen, so to get it back, he asked Hiroshi for help. The two gradually became good friends. Sometimes, to avoid being beaten by his father, Shinji would invite Hiroshi's group of friends over to play. Shinji's father was very uncomfortable with that group, but he didn't dare to do anything to them. Over time, his father also began to ignore Shinji. His mother felt helpless about the situation and didn't interfere much. Yasushi Watanabe, 17 years old, also had a troubled family life. His parents divorced when he was still young, and he lived with his mother and sister. His mother worked at a hospital and was often very busy with work. After entering high school, Hiroshi started pursuing Yasushi's sister, which led to the two boys meeting. After Junko's death was confirmed, her family held a funeral for her. One of her classmates wrote a letter saying, "I didn't expect to see you again in such a situation. I'm sure you've been through a lot. We will never forget you. The principal gave you a diploma. We graduated together. Everyone will always be by your side. I hope you won't suffer too much. Please rest in peace." Usually, cases of juvenile delinquency in Japan are handled by the juvenile court. However, due to the severity of this case, it was handed over to the Tokyo District Court for trial. The prosecution filed charges against the 4 individuals for illegal detention, attempted murder, and manslaughter. On July 31, 1989, the case was officially brought to trial at the Tokyo District Court. The prosecution argued that all 4 were juvenile delinquents. But given the severity of their actions, they should be prosecuted according to adult standards. This was a major and extremely heinous crime, unlike anything Japan had ever seen. The motive behind the crime committed by these delinquents was difficult to comprehend. For the victim, what she endured was beyond what ordinary people could imagine. In court, although the 4 delinquents were found guilty, their lawyer argued that they were juveniles and had no intention of murdering her. After 10 long months of trial, on May 21, 1990, the case finally came to a conclusion. Hiroshi was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Ogura was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. Shinji was sentenced to 4 to 6 years in prison, and Yasushi was sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison. 3 of the remaining 7 delinquents were also detained at a reformatory camp for the purpose of making money. The prosecution refused to accept these sentences, arguing that they were too lenient. They filed a complaint with the Supreme Court of Tokyo. On July 12, 1990, a year later, the Supreme Court issued a new ruling. Except for Ogura, whose sentence remained the same, the sentences for the others were increased. Hiroshi was sentenced to 20 years in prison, Shinji to 5 to 9 years, and Yasushi to 5 to 7 years. However, the prosecution was still not satisfied with this ruling. The Supreme Court of Tokyo explained that, under Japanese law at the time, the defendants were all underage and therefore should be sentenced to probation. After the trial, the parents of the 40 teenagers involved hoped that they and their children would be allowed to kneel down and apologize to Junko's family, seeking a chance for their children to reform. However, this request was denied. According to the court's ruling, Hiroshi's mother sold her house and gathered 50 million yen, about 8.2 billion yen, to compensate Junko's family through a lawyer. Ogura's father sent a large part of his income to a bank account managed by a lawyer. Shinji's parents were aware of the case, but were not convicted. Junko's family was not satisfied with the compensation, so they filed a civil case against Shinji's parents, who also had to compensate. In 1995, Hiroshi, one of the 4 convicted, was released after serving his prison sentence. Having been frequently bullied in prison, he emerged as a broken individual. After his release, he became a lonely person who could only sit at home. In 1997, Shinji was released after serving his sentence. He left the city of Misato with his family, but struggled to find a job. In August 2018, he was arrested again for assault and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. In 1999, Ogura was released after serving his sentence. He changed his name to Rokumisaku and soon married a woman after his release. In 2003, Ogura was arrested again for another crime and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In 2009, Hiroshi was released and changed his name to Yokoyama Hiroshi after being released from prison. In 2013, he was arrested again for fraud. This case is one of the most gruesome in the history of juvenile crime in Japan. 4 criminals committed their crimes as juveniles, and after being released from prison, they still continued to break the law. Even before the trial, they swore that they would never commit another crime. After the case was publicized, Japanese society was engulfed in legal debates about juvenile crime. Some argued that the minimum age for criminal responsibility should be reconsidered. Through the above case, it is clear that juvenile crime is deeply connected to family upbringing. If intervention had occurred sooner, perhaps such a tragedy could have been prevented. Although many decades have passed, this remains one of the most gruesome cases in the history of Japanese crime. Today's video ends here. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.